State's largest school district has yet to decide whether it'll make masks optional come March 31st. That decision to remove masks is not as simple as it may seem. There are a lot of parties involved here, including the teachers union. Good evening. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Steve Dunn.
And I'm Deborah Knapp. Rules in place right now ensure Portland Public School students stay masked through the end of the school year. But as we see several other states lift mandates, holding to that may be a difficult proposition.
Katu's Genevieve Rayome is staying on top of the story now. She's live in North Portland tonight. And Genevieve, the COVID situation at PPS has greatly improved, right?
Yeah, Steve, a month ago, there were roughly 1,500 students and staff at PPS in a quarantine or isolation. I checked the dashboard today and be aware that some of the data may be delayed, but it says there are only 150 students and staff in isolation. So it is clear that the situation is improving at PPS, but the discussion about whether or not to make masks optional is ongoing. It is yet to be determined at the district, and it is very complex for PPS. So I want to break down what we know at this point. On March 31st, the state will remove the mask mandate, giving local districts the power to decide whether or not they want to make masking optional. Here's the deal. At the start of the year, PPS and the teachers union agreed the kids would stay masked throughout the school year. So Deb and Steve, the union says that this agreement will stay in place unless it is agreed that they change it by both parties.
Genevieve, if the district decides it does want to make masking optional, what needs to happen to make that possible?
Well, Steve, I can imagine that there will be conversations between the district and the union, but this is key. The district says it'll follow any changes of the RSSL, or the Ready Schools Safe Learners Guidance. Now, that is the framework that schools across the state follow so that they can handle this year with COVID. So things like social distancing and masking rules. So if the RSSL changes to make masking optional, that opens up a lot more possibilities. PPS is expecting a change to that framework.
Typically, what we've seen happen here over the course of the pandemic is that OHA, ODE will make an announcement like they did on Monday, and then they will wait a couple weeks, or maybe not wait, but work through the updates to RSSL and some of the other OARs that are impacted by the decision. And
we anticipate needing to look at all of those guidelines and say, are there changes we can make if spread is lower?
State health leaders are expecting a lot to improve over the next 7 weeks. With that may come some big changes to school guidance beyond just optional masking. With so much in flux now, local school districts are definitely feeling the pressure. Oregon schools right now are following the Ready Schools Safe Learners Guidance.
K2's Genevieve Rayome is live in Southwest Portland. So Genevieve, under that current guidance, making masking optional would be very challenging for schools.
Yeah, Deb, if the rules stay as they are right now, that means come March 31st, schools would take on a lot more weight when it comes to COVID-19. That's because the state was predicting there will be a lot more absences, and there will also have to be a lot more contact tracing that goes on. So schools would be having to do a lot more work, and that is because of the current Ready Schools Safe Learner Guidance. Now, PPS thinks it's possible the state is going to adjust that guidance, and I asked the state about that today.
I'm the chief of staff here at Portland Public Schools.
Jonathan Garcia says PPS is trying to figure out what to do with masking. On March 31st, the state will lift the mask mandate for schools. Then individual districts will be able to make their own mask rules. While OHA is giving districts this power, the leading health agency and ODE have both said they strongly support universal masking.
What we want as leaders, as educators, and as families, frankly, is consistency.
Dr. Dean Seidlinger clarified today that their stance is in relation to the current COVID situation. By the end of March, state health leaders predict COVID will be much less prevalent and the guidance could change.
At the levels we're seeing now across the state, and with the levels of vaccination we have and the other measures that schools have taken, universal masking right now makes sense.
There are several disadvantages to stopping universal masking in schools. In a letter from ODE Director Colt Gill, he noted that schools who stop masking would carry several large burdens like increased absences, no test to stay program, and more work contact tracing. This is all because of the current Ready Schools Safe Learner Guidance. Jonathan Garcia thinks there may be changes coming to RSSL.
And we hope that ODE and OHA provides clear guidance to local districts, right?
Is ODE changing that guidance?
The short answer is, will guidance change? Yes.
ODE Director Colt Gill saying RSSL will adapt, but not saying exactly when. Dr. Seidlinger adding there are already conversations around this happening.
about what is the burden of responding to COVID in schools like right now. What do we anticipate it'll be like at the end of March when cases are lower? And what impacts would lifting the mask rule have on the number of students who may potentially be exposed or need to quarantine?
So another big question we've heard from parents is, why is the state lifting masking shortly after students return from spring break? You can see that PPS's spring break is scheduled to be in about 6 weeks. That mask mandate scheduled to be lifted from the state in 7 weeks. Now, the state says that school districts should consider that break when they decide exactly when they want to lift that mask mandate.
It is a bit of a setback and a slowdown of what we would expect.
Students statewide are playing catch up in the classroom as we enter year 3 of the pandemic. We're getting new but limited data that paints a picture of Washington students' biggest needs, from math to reading. And tonight, the state superintendent and Seattle Public Schools are sharing their plan to get students back on track. KOMO's Jackie Kent is live in Seattle with this Crisis in the Classroom report. Jackie?
The state's largest school district says this assessment is one of many to come that will help them figure out their strategy to help students in the coming year. Julie Dennis remembers the challenges her now 2nd and 4th grade boys had with remote learning in the Shoreline School District last year.
It doesn't feel like a full year that they're behind, but I would say probably a few months behind at least.
Her family isn't alone. New data from the so-called Smarter Balanced Assessment states less than half of Seattle students last year met or exceeded state standards in math, and it was less than 60% in English language arts and reading.
We weren't that surprised. There was a lot of impacts from the pandemic.
That's a drop of nearly 20% in math and 10% in ELA standards when compared to the most recent data we could find from the 2018-2019 school year.
It is a first look for what we need to be doing for this year. So it's a great time for us to say, okay, what's really happening? Are our strategies right on target?
State Superintendent Chris Rakedahl claims students are not failing, arguing this assessment doesn't paint the whole picture of student growth in a year.
What we have to do is reinforce supports for them, get more of that mental health, school psychologists, nurses, social workers.
The state's largest school district agrees, which is why it will be performing even more assessments to gauge the academic and emotional needs of individual students, schools, and the district as a whole.
Each student and family get their own individual assessment. And so the individual family and the student get to work with their teachers.
It's a plan Rakedahl says will take time to see results.
No one should expect that there's some magic tutoring or magic intervention that just suddenly changes things. This is a process.
We've posted a link at KOMOnews.com where you can find the assessment results for your child's district. And individual student scores are expected to be available in the coming weeks. Live in Seattle, Jackie Kent, KOMO News.
And here's a closer look at the assessment scores that Jackie mentioned, which were just released today by Seattle Public Schools. Testing was done in the fall of 2021. Just under 60% of students met grade level standards for English language arts. Scores were even lower for math and science at 43.5% and 44%. Those scores are down significantly from pre-pandemic testing, which happened during the 2018-2019 school year.